Hey friends, welcome back to Homestead on a Prayer. In case you're new here, my name's Jennifer. Today we're sitting out in the very end of my 2023 garden, and I'm going to be continuing my series where we kind of recap the 2023 garden, talk about what went right, what went wrong. And as I mentioned in my tomato variety review video, which was the first video in this series, at the end of every garden season, I find it really useful to just take a look back at the garden season while it's still fresh in my mind, and just to get some ideas for next year, just really get some ideas of what things worked really well, what things didn't work so well, what varieties I really enjoyed and what varieties didn't really work for me. So today what I'm going to be focusing on is some of my standout varieties that performed really well in the 2023 garden. I'm going to talk about a range of vegetables. Now, I do just want to mention that this video is not going to include every variety that did well. These are just the exceptional top performers that I felt did really well, that really wowed me in the 2023 garden. And just to give you guys a little spoiler, all of these varieties will be grown in my 2024 garden as well. So first I want to mention cucumbers. This year I grew more cucumber varieties in my garden than I ever have before. I want to say I think I grew maybe 8 varieties, and there were 2 varieties that really wowed me. Now, neither of these varieties was a surprise to me because I've grown both of them before. They have consistently performed really well for me, and they just outperformed every other cucumber variety by a mile. The first cucumber variety that I want to mention is the homemade pickles. As you can see, even though it is the end of the season, it's almost October, I'm still getting some cucumbers here in Connecticut. Now, the homemade pickles looks like your typical classic pickling cucumber, and that's really what it is. It's great for making pickles, but it actually makes a great slicing cucumber too. And I made so many pickles this year. I didn't end up canning any pickles because we really do prefer refrigerator pickles. I find that they just hold their crispness a lot better. But I want to say I probably have 6 or 7 quarts of refrigerator pickles in my fridge right now, even though we've been eating them all summer. It really was an exceptional cucumber year here in my area in Connecticut, and this homemade pickles cucumber really is my go-to. You'll find that it's very similar to a lot of the other classic cucumber or the classic pickling cucumber varieties, but I found, at least in my area, this one consistently outperforms the others. So this is going to be in my garden every year. I will definitely be planting it again next year. The other cucumber variety that really impressed me, again, not a surprise, is the silver slicer cucumber. I harvested 2. These are a little on the small side, but I harvested these just for the purpose of showing you in this video. As you can see, this is, it's kind of a creamy white cucumber. It's very different from the classic green cucumber, and I find that it makes a great contrast with the green cucumbers. I like to grow both of them. And while this is probably considered a slicing cucumber based on the name, the silver slicer, I find that it is excellent for pickles too, especially if you pick it a little bit on the small side. So I made refrigerator pickles with both the homemade pickles and the silver slicer. I like to mix them together in the same jar just for aesthetics and just because I'm harvesting a lot of them at the same time. And I find, honestly, it worked just as well. Now, these 2 cucumber varieties, I will say, they really impressed me partly because they're just both so prolific. So I got more from these 2 varieties than I did from all the other cucumber varieties in my garden combined. And these 2 just kept yielding all summer, consistently all summer. And as you can see, even though it's the end of the season, I'm still getting cucumbers from both of them. So those will both definitely be in my garden next year in 2024. So next I want to talk about beans. Now, there's 2 varieties that made my 2023 standout list. They are both pole bean varieties. Now, I do like bush beans too. I also grow those, and I do really enjoy them. But I find that, at least in my garden, pole beans generally outperform the bush beans. So while I'll continue to grow some bush bean varieties next year, the 2 bean varieties that I will make sure I always have in my garden are these that I'm about to share with you. The first is rattlesnake. Now, as you can see, these beans here, they're sort of a flattened green bean. They've got purple streaks on them. They're really pretty, really interesting. I find that these beans, again, they're really prolific. I find that the flavor is really good. They produce a lot of beans. They stay tender quite a bit longer than a lot of other they stay tender longer than a lot of other bean varieties that I've tried. I just overall really love them. And I mean, as a bonus, you get this beautiful purple streaking, and I think that just makes for just a beautiful presentation. So rattlesnake pole beans will be in my garden every single year. The second variety of beans that really wowed me this year is the Vortex green bean. Now, I grabbed a couple of these to show you, but honestly, these are past their peak. These are a little bit overgrown. You can see, ideally, I would have harvested this a few days ago. So I mentioned that it was an exceptional cucumber year. It really was an exceptional year for green beans as well. And honestly, we kind of got overrun with them to the point where I would have so many in my fridge that I missed harvesting for a couple days, and then some of this would happen. The beans would get a little bit overgrown. So at this point in the season, I'm mostly just letting my beans go to produce seeds so that I can grow them both again next year. So all that to be a really long-winded way of saying that these are not the prime examples of Vortex green beans. If you pick them at the right time, they'll be a lot more slender than this. But I found that those beans are delicious. They stay tender a really long time for a bean. They yield really early. They yield earlier than the rattlesnake green beans. I find that I like growing both of them because I like that they sort of alternate maturity dates. The Vortex is usually ready first, then those kind of go into a little bit of a lull. We start harvesting the rattlesnake, then those go into a lull and the Vortex is back. So I find that by growing the beans with different maturity dates, I am able to get a pretty consistent harvest for most of the summer. But again, those beans were really prolific, they're really tender, they're really delicious. I do find that the Vortex bean seeds are a little bit harder to find than some other bean seeds. So as I mentioned, I am trying to save my own this year, and hopefully that will work really well. Now I can see that the sun is coming out behind me and getting really bright. So I think we're going to shift location a little bit to talk about the rest of the vegetables on my list. So the next category that I want to talk about is tomatoes. Now, unfortunately, my tomato season is for the most part over, so I don't have any fresh tomatoes to show you guys. I will try to put some clips up on the screen so that you can see some tomatoes from earlier in the season that we grew in the garden. But I do have a few varieties that I want to share that were really standout producers for me in the garden this year. First, I have two larger slicer varieties. And actually, they were both new to me this year, so I was really excited to have tried these new varieties. And honestly, some of my tried and true favorites didn't really do that well this year, so I was really happy that I had tried some of these new varieties that kind of really impressed me and filled in the gaps. So the first new variety that really wowed me was the Cindy's West Virginia. If you watched the tomato review video that I posted a couple weeks ago, then you've already seen a lot of detail about basically all of the new tomato varieties that I grew this year. But the Cindy's West Virginia really impressed me because it's an heirloom tomato, and for an heirloom tomato, it yielded really early for me. The tomatoes were really big, they were really meaty, really delicious. They didn't have a large seed cavity, it was mostly just tomato meat. And I actually found that, at least in my area, the Cindy's West Virginia tomato resisted disease a lot longer than a lot of the other tomato varieties in my garden did this year. So I was really impressed with that one, and I'll definitely be growing a few plants of the Cindy's West Virginia in my 2024 garden. The next variety that I wanted to mention, this is also a slicer variety, and this was, again, my first year growing this variety, is the Wisconsin 55. I found that this tomato, it just produced so much. They were kind of, the classic perfect red tomato, just perfect red globes. They didn't really have blemishes. I found that the tomato, again, was probably more disease resistant than most of the other heirloom tomatoes that I grew. And while the flavor was really good, it wasn't a tomato that just had such a unique, amazing flavor that I would grow it only for the flavor, but the flavor was really good. And just the fact that it was so prolific and the tomatoes were so beautiful and perfect, and I just really enjoyed that tomato this year, so I will definitely be growing that one again next year. I also have 3 cherry tomato varieties that I want to mention that really stood out in the 2023 garden to me this year. The first one is, this one is a tried and true that I grow every year and I will always grow, and that is the Sun Gold cherry tomato. Sun Gold cherry tomatoes are perfect little orange globes. They're so delicious and so sweet. I find that they're very prolific. They're usually very early. Most years it's one of my earlier cherry tomato varieties to yield. And honestly, I don't really have anything bad to say about the Sun Gold tomato. It's so good. The flavor it really does have that wow factor. And I'm going to grow that every year because honestly, I just love it. The next tomato variety that did really well for me this year is the Matt's Wild Cherry tomato. This one again is a tried and true favorite. I find that the Matt's Wild Cherry consistently does well. I find that from year to year in my garden, different varieties tend to do better in different years, kind of based on the weather conditions and the individual growing conditions for that year. But the Matt's Wild Cherry is really dependable. I don't think I've ever had a year that I've grown it that it hasn't done well. So these are small red cherry tomatoes. They pack a lot of flavor into that really small tomato size. They're really good, very prolific. It's another one of my earlier cherry tomatoes. That one's actually my daughter's favorite cherry tomato. So I will definitely grow that one next year and probably every year that I garden. The third cherry tomato variety, and this is the final one that I want to mention in this video, was actually a new one that I grew this year for the first time. And that is the Berries Crazy Cherry. Now this tomato had come very highly recommended to me by many people. So it was time that I finally give it a try. I found that it was really prolific. It had these really light yellow, and sorry, my rooster has some opinions too. He got to try a few of them too, and he also approves. He wants to make sure you know that. So anyway, back to the Berries Crazy Cherry. These are pale yellow, almost cream colored cherry tomatoes, really prolific. They're really sweet. I find that they're a lot milder than a lot of other tomato flavor. So it adds a really nice contrast in color and in flavor, and I'll definitely be growing those again next year because I was really happy with them. So next we're going to talk about lettuce varieties. And I'm going to say this one was a little bit of a challenge because I grow so much lettuce and I grow so many lettuce varieties. Honestly, I'm probably going to grow a dozen or more varieties again next year because I really like that variety. But there are a couple varieties that consistently do well for me, and this year, once again, they outperformed a lot of my other lettuce varieties. The first one that I want to mention, and this is, if I had to choose, probably what I would say is my favorite lettuce variety, that is Buttercrunch. I love Buttercrunch lettuce because it's dependable. It always yields well. It always tastes good. It lasts a really long time in the garden, for me at least here in Connecticut. It lasts a long time before bolting. I have a lot of other lettuce varieties that will bolt and go to seed a lot earlier, and the flavor really turns bitter when that happens. So having a lettuce variety that holds longer into the summer definitely extends the harvest a lot. I also find that the Buttercrunch does well for me in cool weather. So that's just an all-around great pick for me, and I just love the lettuce because it's got a great color, great texture. It's just all around a great lettuce. So as I said, if I had to pick one favorite, that would be the one. The second lettuce variety that I want to mention in this video is the Marvel of Four Seasons. Now, I want to say, I think that one is also a butterhead, meaning that it would be somewhat related to Buttercrunch lettuce. But that one has a little bit of a reddish tinge to it. As you can guess by the name, Marvel of Four Seasons, it's a lettuce that is really adapted to grow in a variety of weather conditions. So I find, similar to the Buttercrunch, it does well for me in the summer, and it does well for me early in the season, and then again at the end of the season as the weather kind of cools down and the daylight hours, kind of shrink. So I found that that one, actually, probably I would say Marvel of Four Seasons was probably my best performing lettuce in the garden if I'm judging by this year alone. So those two are two classic favorites. I will definitely grow those along with many others in my garden next year. All right, so next let's talk about peppers. Now, bell peppers have never really been all that successful for me. I love bell peppers and we use them a lot. So every year I try to grow bell peppers and they never really yield that well for me. So this year, one of my main goals was to find some basically bell pepper alternatives. Other peppers that I could use in the place of bell peppers that had that same flavor, texture, just the same kind of essence as bell peppers, but that performed better and yielded better for me. And I think that I found some good contenders here. These are Corno de Toro peppers. You can see I have both the red variety and the yellow variety. I found that these peppers are delicious. They basically, obviously the shape is different, but they have nice thick walls. They have that same similar bell pepper flavor. And I really enjoyed both of these peppers. But the difference is that they yielded much more than bell peppers typically do for me. I found that each Corno de Toro plant produced quite a few peppers. Honestly, on my deck, I still have lots of Corno de Toro peppers that are still green. So I'm waiting for those to ripen, basically to complete my pepper yield for the year. But we really enjoyed those. So next year, I think what I'm going to do is I am going to grow fewer varieties of peppers, but I'm going to increase the number of both the red and the yellow Corno de Toro peppers that I grow. And interestingly, my favorite bell pepper is the orange bell pepper. So I was searching online to see if the Corno de Toro pepper also comes in orange, kind of hoping that it would have a similar flavor and obviously a similar color to orange bell peppers. And I was able to find some really limited information on the orange Corno de Toro pepper. So I'm going to say it looks like it does exist, but I couldn't find that much about it. So if you're familiar with a variety of Corno de Toro that comes in orange, if you've grown it before, I would love to hear anything that you know about it. I would love to hear the flavor and if it is as prolific as the red and yellow varieties. So I'm pretty sure that I'm definitely going to grow the red and yellow varieties again next year. I'm going to try to hunt down some seeds for the orange variety as well, and hopefully I will be adding that to the garden as well. But again, that's something I have no experience with, so I would love to hear if any of you out there have any experience with that one. The other pepper variety that I want to mention that was really successful for me this year is the shishito pepper. Now, this was not new for me. I've grown these, well, this is actually just my second year growing them, but they performed really well for me last year and again this year. As you can see, these are small, sort of wrinkled peppers. I don't know if you'd really consider them sweet, but they're not spicy. They're kind of my favorite way to use them, and probably honestly the way that they are best known for is to blister them, cook them in a little bit of oil on a really high heat, and then make some sort of garlic aioli dipping sauce. I really enjoyed them that way. We'll definitely be growing those again next year. And I found that I only grew a few shishito plants, but they produced really well. They were really prolific. They were really early producing for pepper, so we will be growing more of those next year as well. Next, I do want to mention zucchinis. Now, honestly, I have grown quite a few zucchini varieties. I find that they're somewhat interchangeable for me. Now, I'm honestly not a huge zucchini fan. We do like to have some zucchini, but I'm not one of those that will just eat zucchini all summer long. But I found that in my experience, my favorite zucchini variety is the Cocozelle zucchini. We grew that this year and I really enjoyed it. I find that it has a good flavor. I find that the plants are fairly prolific. They're really pretty looking fruits with the dark and light green stripes. I did not grow it in my garden last year in the 2022 garden, and I found that we really missed it. So this year the Cocozelle returned. We grew it in the 2023 garden and we were really happy with it. So while I will say I don't know if there's any specific zucchini variety that really wows me that much more than the others, I think Cocozelle would be my favorite, and we did really enjoy having it in the garden again this year. Next, I want to talk a little bit about herbs. Now in this list, I'm going to include both culinary herbs and medicinal herbs, so there'll be a little bit of both. But there were some herbs that really impressed me that did really well in the garden this year, so I wanted to make sure to mention those. The first two herbs that I'm going to mention are both varieties of basil, which is basically, at least in my mind, the classic summer culinary herb. We can never have too much basil. We eat a lot of basil over the summer, and I always like to preserve up a lot of basil for the winter as well. So finding a dependable, high-yielding basil plant with great flavor is a really big priority for us. This year we had two varieties that really wowed me. The first is spicy bush basil. Now this basil, it's really pretty basil. It kind of grows almost in a mound. It's got smaller leaves than the average basil. It's definitely got a stronger flavor. We really enjoyed it because it's very dependable. I mean, basils, you harvest for the leaves, so it's kind of hard, I guess, to compare earliness when it comes to basils. But we found that the plants grew fairly large, fairly fast. We're able to harvest a lot of leaves from them. They stayed healthy for a nice long time. We harvested a lot, which really prolonged the amount of time that they yielded without bolting. So we really enjoyed those. We really enjoyed the flavor. We really enjoyed the beauty of the plant, and it yielded really well. The second variety of basil that I want to mention is sometimes called mammoth basil. I've also seen it called lettuce leaf basil. That variety of basil is really good. As you can imagine from the name, it produces really large leaves, and that's really nice if you are doing something like pesto where you're going to need a lot of it, or if you want to use it as like a lettuce wrap or something like that. Sometimes it's really useful to have those really big leaves. We found that it produced a lot, again, had a great flavor. It was just an overall well-performing basil. Now, I do want to mention that I do also grow kind of the classic Italian sweet basil, and we love that one too. I'm just trying to mention maybe a little bit more unusual varieties that just really wowed me and stood out to me more than the average. So, we can go ahead and add the classic sweet basil onto the list too, because honestly, I love that one and I'm going to grow that every year too. The other two herb varieties that I want to mention are probably a little more towards the medicinal side of herbs. We really enjoyed these as well. The first is, hopefully I'm going to pronounce this right, Zlatiland chamomile. We really enjoyed that chamomile. I found that in my area, chamomile is actually a little bit finicky. That probably sounds strange to a lot of you because I know in some places chamomile basically grows like a weed and it's incredibly easy to grow. In my area, I tend to struggle a little bit with chamomile, but the Zloty Land chamomile really did really well. I find that it yields a lot, and it yielded for a really long time too. It's got a great flavor in tea. I harvested lots of flowers throughout the summer, and I have a whole nice pile of dried chamomile that's ready to make tea for us over the winter. So we've really been enjoying having that chamomile in the garden. Plus, it just looks beautiful and cheerful as it grows. The pollinators love it. It's just an all-around great plant to grow. The final herb variety that I'm going to mention is also a medicinal herb, and this is the Resina calendula. Now, calendula is a great plant to grow in the garden. Whether you plan to make use of the medicinal properties or not, it's a beautiful plant. It's cheerful. Again, the pollinators love it, so it's a great companion plant for your garden. Growing flowers that attracts pollinators really does help your vegetables to do better, because the more pollinators that there are in your garden, the more well-pollinated your vegetable plants will be. But that being said, I do love the Resina calendula for its own sake as well. We use a lot of calendula medicinally. It's great for your skin. It also has a lot of other less well-known medicinal uses as well. So if you're interested in that, definitely go ahead and look into some of the medicinal uses of calendula because there are a lot of them. Now, I find that this calendula is really beautiful. It can bloom in either orange or yellow, depending on the individual plant, and we got some of both. We really like it. I harvested it starting early in the season, and honestly, I'm still harvesting it now. There's calendula blooming in my garden, and it's just looking beautiful and cheerful. Calendula tends to be a little bit resistant to frost, which means that it can continue yielding after a light frost. So it's just an all-around great plant to grow for pollinators and for medicinal use as well. So that kind of segues into the final category that I want to talk about in this video, and that was flowers. I grow a lot of flowers in my vegetable garden. I find that there is something really valuable about making your garden a beautiful place, and that's even on top of the tangible benefits of attracting pollinators and attracting insects that will prey on pests in your garden. There's so many benefits to including flowers in your vegetable garden as well, so I grew many varieties. That being said, there were 2 varieties I grew this year that really stood out to me more than the others, and I just want to mention those here. The first is the Picotee Cosmos. It's a beautiful flower. It's delicate and light and airy, and it's really easy to kind of throw into your vegetable garden in between other plants. It intermingles with them really well. It's great for pollinators. It's great for beauty. I find that I grow the Picotee Cosmos every year. I usually grow several varieties of cosmos in my garden every year, and I enjoy all of them. But I find that the Picotee is really reliable. It always does well for me, and it's so beautiful with those. It's got the white petals with the purple edging. It just makes a really beautiful contrast to the garden, so I will grow that one every year. The final flower variety, and the final variety of all that I want to mention in this video, is a zinnia that I grew for the first time. You know, similarly to cosmos, I grow many varieties of zinnias in my garden, and I love them all. They're all beautiful, and I will continue to grow many varieties because I love the contrast and the beauty and the variety. But this variety is called, hopefully I pronounced this one right as well, Benares or Benares. It's the giant wine color, and it was a stunner in my garden. It's still blooming now, and it's beautiful. It's got these deep, rich, purpley red blooms, and they're nice large blooms. It started early, and it just kept going all summer long. It's just a beautiful color that really pops in the garden, so I really enjoyed it, and I will always grow zinnias in my garden, and I'm thinking I will probably always grow the Benares Giant Wine Zinnia in particular. So thank you guys so much for hanging out in the garden with me on this early fall day as we get ready to, sadly, say goodbye to the 2023 garden. As I mentioned, I like to film this kind of video partly for my own records, but also I know that a lot of you have been following along with me since the very beginning of this garden, back in winter when I first got my seeds in the mail and I shared with you what varieties I was going to grow. So I wanted to give all of you an update and just let you know which of those varieties just outperformed the rest and did really well. As I mentioned, there were plenty of other varieties that did well also, plenty of other varieties that I'll be growing again, but I just wanted to mention these few standout varieties. And as always, if you have any other must-grow varieties that you want to recommend, whether it's something that I recommended here and you just want to add your experience onto mine, or if it's something completely different from anything that I said, I would love to hear your experience and your recommendations as well. So I hope that you guys will continue to follow along with my garden. I am, as the garden season winds down, starting to look forward to the 2024 garden season. and I'm already thinking about what seeds I'm going to order and what I'm going to grow next year. So I hope that you stick with me to see how the garden does next year. I hope you guys are having a great day, and I can't wait to see you soon. I'll see you next time.